Owen stepped back and admired the cage. It was perfect. The boys had rolled out a piece of chicken wire and bent it into a rectangular shape. They used the wire cutters that Travis had taken from his father's toolbox and cut it into 2 pieces of chicken wire for the top of the and the bottom of the cage. Since they didn't have a staple gun, in no way they were going to borrow one of Vila's fly-eyed brother Travis's. They used a ball of wire to attach a tomato stake to each other of the 4 corners. Next, they attached the bottom secretly all around the edges and attached the top loosely on one of the ends so that they could lift it up and down. Open and closed, they made a latch out of bent wire to open the top. They tested it a few times, opening and closing the top, hooking and unlocking the latch. Owen had never seen a finger cage. Tully was going to love it, and Tully's going to love it, Owen said. Travis and Stumpy nodded. Now we're all going to do it and put it in some water, Owen said, and walked onto the rickety dock and into the pond. He squinted into the murky water. I wonder how deep it is here, he said. Stumpy tossed a rock into the pond. Boink! It disappeared out of sight. Owen pulled a tomato stake out of the wheelbarrow. He walked to the edge of the dock and put the stake into the water until he felt the squishy mud on the bottom of the pond. He inched along the edge of the dock, poking the stake into the water until he could no longer feel the bottom. This is where it starts getting deeper, he said. We should put the cage here. He poked the stick into the pond some more, stirring the muddy bottom. Once the end can be in the shallow part of Tully, get out of the water, and one end can be dipped deeper part so he can swim around. So the boys sat on the dock and planned how they were going to position the cage into the pond. They debated which side of the dock was best and how deep the cage should be in the water, and whether or not they should attach it to the dock with wire. But before they could start carrying out their plans, a voice interrupted the still summer air. A dreaded voice, Vila's voice. Ooh. Owen looked at Travis, and Travis looked at Stumpy, and Stumpy looked at Owen. Dang, Owen said. What's she want? Travis said. Let's hide. Stumpy said. Owen. Vila's voice drifted through the trees up at Owen's house. We better get up there and just see or she's liable to come down here. Owen said. Nah, Travis said. She hates it here. But Owen wasn't taking any chances. Let's go, he said. The boys raced up the path through the woods. When they got to Owen's backyard, Vila was sitting under the stairs beside the frog's house. What are you doing here? Owen said. Arlene's looking for you. She pushed at her glasses and peered into the plastic tube beside her. Your frog looks terrible, she said. Go away, Owen said. Yeah, go away, Travis said. Stumpy kicked at the dry dirt of the yard, sending dust and pebbles into Vila's direction. Vila stood up and wiped the dirt off her shorts. Is that water from the pond, she said, pointing at the tub where Tully sat, his big yellow eyes staring up at the dirty water. Owen pushed his thoughts down, trying hard not to let it come busting out like it wanted to. Why is Arlene looking out for me? He said. Why should you put water from the pond in there? Vilas brushed past the boys and skipped toward the hedge. Then she turned around and said, Erlene's knows you took the wheelbarrow out of the barn and you left. The shed door opened. Who in the world told you you could have chicken wire? Then she leaned down and crawled through the hole in the hedge, disappearing into the backyard. Let's go back and put the cage back into the pond, Owen said. But just as the boys reached the edge of the yard, a thunder rumbled and rain began to fall in a big, slow drops. Plunk, plunk, plunk. And then the sky turned dark, lightning flashed, and the rain poured down, drenching the boys and sending them scurriedly for shelter. That night at supper, Owen told his parents about the frog cage. Erlene fumed by the stove. His father thought it was a great idea. His mother was worried that the boys had fallen into the pond. Erlene mumbled about the chicken wire belonging to his grandfather, and that Maggie strayed a cat and getting in the shed when Owen left the door open. After supper, Owen took Thule up to his bedroom and set him in the middle of the bed. Thule did a little half jump and then settled down in the folds of quiet bedspread. Owen inspected Thule's frog skin. He rumbled his fingers Thule's yellow throat. He examined Thule's big webbed feet. He lifted Thule and peered into his eyes. Then he put the bullfrog into the tub in the closer and sat on the bed and worried that maybe Viola was right. Maybe he should have used the water from the pond in the tub instead of the water from the hose. Owen sat and listened. The rain pattered against the window. Thunder rumbled into the distance, but side of the bed it was quite quiet, Owen said. When he had first brought Thule home, the frog had croaked all night. That deep sound from the bullfrogs make. But now it was quiet. The flashing light lit up Owen's room. The rain beat harder against the window. And tomorrow, Owen thought, tomorrow he had to do two things: get the frog into the pond so Thule couldn't move to be happy. Find the thing that had fallen off the train. That's it.
"Y'all get out of my yard," Jolene Burkus hollered through the screen door. Owen cupped his hand over a grasshopper in the weeds and glared at her. Anybody who'd tear down a perfectly good fort was deserving of a glare. Owen wondered what she had done with that trapdoor he had sawed into the wooden floor of his old bedroom, or the ladder he and Travis and Stumpy had nailed to the back of the garage so they could climb up on top of the roof. "I said, get out of my yard." Jolene stormed out onto the porch and flapped a dish towel at the boys. Travis yanked a small green cantaloupe off a tangled vine beside the bird path and tossed it towards the porch. It landed on the walkway with a thwump. Before Jolene could stomp down the steps, the boys were clear across the street and around back of Stumpy's house, laughing so hard they could barely catch their breath. Then they jumped on their bikes and raced over to Owen's house. As Owen pedaled, clutching a jar of grasshoppers in one hand, his stomach flipped and flopped with excitement. Today was the day they were going to put the cage in the pond. They had made all kinds of plans for Thule's new house. It would be attached to the side of the dock, one end in the shallow water and one end in the deeper water. It would be a log to sit on and rocks to hunker down beside and leaves to sleep on. Water bugs and crickets and flies could go right through the chicken wire, so Thule would always have something tasty to snack on. And every once in a while, the boys could open the top of the cage and take Thule out and play with him. It would be great. "Let's go on down to the dock and start cutting the baling wire," Owen said after dropping 2 grasshoppers in the tub for Thule. He retrieved the baling wire and wire cutters from the shed, put them in a plastic grocery bag, and carefully closed the door behind him so Erlene wouldn't have anything to yammer about. Then he started across the yard with Travis and Stumpy behind him. But just as they got to the edge of the woods, Viola crawled through the hedge and said, "You should catch crawfish." Owen sighed and rolled his eyes at Travis and Stumpy. "Be quiet," Travis said. "Yeah, be quiet," Stumpy said. Viola eyed the grocery bag in Owen's hand. "What's that?" she said. "Nothing." Owen jiggled the bag at Viola. "Your mother's calling you," he said. "Bullfrogs love crawfish," Viola said, pushing at her glasses. "I read it in the encyclopedia at my cousin's house." "Crawfish? Really?" There were tons of crawfish in the creek beside Travis's house. Owen had caught about 1,000,000 of them last summer. The boys had even had crawfish races and made trophies for the winners. "You think you know everything, but you don't," Travis said. I know that bullfrogs don't want names, and they don't want to live in cages, and they love to eat crawfish. Viola lunged for the grocery bag in Owen's hand, but he yanked it away before she could grab it. "Go away, Viola," Owen hollered. Then he motioned for Travis and Stumpy to follow him and started down the path through the woods. After a few feet, he rolled around to see if Viola was following them. She wasn't. She was standing at the edge of the woods with that smug look on her smug face and sending irritation zipping down the path, full steam ahead. "She's gonna follow us," Stumpy said. "Nah," Owen said as he stomped down the path, swinging the grocery bag. "When she goes in the woods, she gets wheezy and itchy. Besides, she hates the pond. There's too many gnats and too much mud and poison oak and all." Owen hoped he was right, but with a girl like Viola, you never knew. "There!" Owen stood up and grinned down at the cage. The perfect cage. The cage where Tully would live and be happy. "Let's go get him," he said, and raced up the path, through the woods, into the yard, and over to the back steps, to the tub where Tully sat, blinking up at the summer sky. Pete and Leroy leaped off the porch, tails wagging, and trotted over to join the fun. Owen lifted Tully out of the tub. The back door opened, and Eileen stepped out of the house, glared down at him. Her eyes darted from him to Tully to Travis to Stumpy, and then to him again. "You're not going back yonder to those train tracks, are you?" she said. "No, ma'am." She glared some more. "You're not going down on that rotten old dock, are you?" "We're taking Tully down to the pond." Owen held Tully up so his froggy legs dangled. Owen was a master of evasion. He could evade a question better than anyone he knew, but Eileen was persistent. "You're not going down on that rotten old dock, are you?" she asked again. Owen's mind raced. He was thinking that maybe he needed to sharpen his evasion skills. "We put the cage in the pond for Tully," he said. "You listen to me, Owen Jester," Eileen said. "I'm in no mood to be fishing 3 drowned boys out of that snake-infested pond." Owen heard Travis and Stumpy shuffling in the dirt behind him. Travis and Stumpy were scared of Eileen. They always left all of the evading to Owen. "Yes, ma'am," Owen said, because what else could he say? Eileen made a humph noise and pressed her lips together in a thin, hard line. Owen waited. Eileen went back to the house, letting the screen door slam shut behind her. Owen and Travis and Stumpy and Pete and Leroy raced to the pond with Tully. And that was chapter 8 of The Fantastic Secret of Owen Jester.